Hi, everyone. I'm here with Ken Ammi, and he is a person who knows a lot about some of the spiritual aspects of the Bible. He's written a number of books, and so we're going to get into some really interesting stuff today. We're going to talk about angels, demons, heaven, hell, all sorts of cool things. The unseen realm, in case you're really interested. I've been following Michael Heiser a lot lately and reading his books. I just ordered 3 more books from him. I've read 2 of his books. And I also have been studying some of the passages in the Bible that relate to the unseen realm and relate to the spiritual warfare that's going on in our midst, where we don't even know about this going on, except for that we actually have a lot of information in the Bible that's given us a lot of hints, but people haven't put some of the information together. And I don't think the church does a terribly great job of really communicating what's really going on out there. And I think that some of the authors out there, like Ken Ammi, are trying to figure out ways to bring that knowledge to the folks. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ken Ammi. He is here with me in the stadium where we are right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. So Ken, would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe tell us about your books that you've written. You've written quite a few. So let's go.
The stadium, huh? We're in Thunderdome.
Yeah, we're in stadium.
Well, thank you so much again for having me. I'm honored. And yes, this is an area that I call the paranormal that I've been very interested in, and I've attempted to specialize in it. So just to give you a background on how some of the books came about, I thought to myself, well, there's God and then there's us earth dwellers, right? But then there's this other realm. And I thought, well, I'd like to know what the Bible says about everything, everyone, every being in that other realm. So I spent a few years just looking up every Bible reference to all of it. And then very slowly, as tends to happen with me, is when I'll take in a ton of information and then I'll let it stew, right? I like the puzzle pieces coming together and then attempted to systematize it. And I wrote one gigantic book on angels, demons, Satan, cherubim, seraphim, evil, wicked, lying spirits. You mentioned it, you name it, all of it. And then I thought, that's a bit much. I was one book about everything, and I definitely realized it's a bit much. So then I broke it up into different volumes, which made it, I think, more digestible to the average reader. And so that's what I've been it's not my only interest. I definitely have a lot of books on other issues, but this is something that's constantly on my heart and mind. It's something I constantly like to discuss.
No, I think it's a fascinating topic, and I'm really interested. And actually, it's kind of interesting because I also wrote a gigantic book, and then I realized it was too much.
Yeah.
I put it on my kids' desks. I have the book, and then I thought to myself, I need to write short, quick books. And so I wrote a short, quick book, and I'm in the middle of writing another short, quick book. So I want to try to, you want to try to get information out, but it also has to be relatable. It also has to be interesting,
Right.
and you can't just go on and on because you lose people's attention,
Yes,
unfortunately,
it has
unless
to
you're
be.
Stephen King.
Yeah, it has to be digestible. And then the more books I write, the more I find myself saying, well, in this book, I'm telling you these bits of details, but if you want a ton more, then you're going to have to look at my other book. And it's inevitable that after a while as an author, you end up doing things like that because you can't repeat yourself just because you're looking at a slightly different aspect of the same issue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, let's get into this. Are you familiar with Michael Heiser's work by chance?
I am.
Because I've been listening. Now, here's how I want to maybe start this off. Is I read his book Unseen Realm, and in the very first passage in that book, he talks about Psalm 82 and how there's a reference to the sons of God. And then we go to Deuteronomy 32, and it basically says that during the Tower of Babel, the sons of God were basically not doing the right things. They weren't, there's a good set of sons of God and there's a bad set of sons of God. And unfortunately, some of these gods had decided that they wanted to receive worship themselves. And so God disinherited the nations at the Tower of Babel. Everyone started speaking a different language. And suddenly these gods were given some sort of dominion over different areas in the ancient Near East, extending out to Spain and even India and places like that. And they were given some sort of powers. And so we can kind of understand there is a spiritual realm even operating today in some of these areas and all around the world, really. But the interesting thing is then the Pentecost came about, where the apostles were given the ability to speak on other languages, and they reined in the nation. So all of the apostles went out and went to all of these different places that had specifically been disinherited during Deuteronomy 32, and they reined them back in. And interestingly, also, if we go back to the time when Jesus was tempted by Satan, Satan basically said that he at that point was in control of the kingdoms of the earth. But then later on, we find out in Matthew 28, after Jesus resurrected, all power and all authority was given to Jesus in heaven and on earth. And so it's pretty interesting, but we still to this day have this spiritual realm and all of these other powers operating and thinking apparently that they're going to somehow be able to overtake the highest power, which is the only one that was supposed to be worshiped in the first place. That's my take in a nutshell. And so I don't know what you make of any of that, or what you think about any of that.
I'm very much on line with what you just said. I wonder if we should maybe take a step back to start more from a point of view of defining our terms and making sure we know who and what we're talking about, if you don't mind.
I think that sounds great.
I may actually be naughty enough to put you on the spot, if I may.
Good, because I don't know that much, so you can feel free to put me on the spot.
That might be perfect then. So basically, okay, so if we just discuss angels for a moment, what would you say we know about them, just in general terms?
Here's what I know, and it's not that much. So what I know is the word for angel refers to messenger. And I know that, like in the book of Daniel, for example, we had the angel Gabriel. We also had the angel Gabriel appear to Mother Mary, and the angel Gabriel also appeared to Elizabeth. And so I know that these angels seem to come down at different times through the Old Testament and the New Testament, often giving messages. And I also know in the Old Testament, there's several instances where the angel of the Lord seems to refer to the Lord rather than just someone who's just at the mere level of an angel. And so that's my knowledge of angels. I mean, I could go beyond that, but that's pretty much what it is. I'm sure you have much more than that.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a good starting point. No question about it. I think you're dead on with that. And in Daniel, we also get the name of another angel who is Michael, right? The Archangel Michael.
Right.
As actually that ties into what you began with, because he's referred to as one of the princes over Daniel's people, right? So generally, we all know, and this is common knowledge, angels are spirits, and they take on human form when they interact with us. And there's different kinds of angels, like seraphim and cherubim. God bless you. And none of that is accurate. That's why I call it common knowledge, because as I explain in some of the intros of my books on this stuff, one day I realized common knowledge are those things that everybody knows, even though nobody knows how anybody knows. This stuff we know, and it's simplistic, so it's easy to understand, but those things are not biblically accurate. So, for example, it's correct to say that the angels, the malachim, are messengers. So that if a being does not have the job function of delivering messages, then by definition, they're not an angel. Okay, so seraphim and cherubim are not angels, because again, by definition, that's not their title, it's not their job function. And they also look differently from one another. So they are a different category of being altogether. And now that angels are spirit, that is really an overarching misconception and a very common one. You will find that there's only one single verse in the whole entire Bible that you could ever hope to build that theory on. That is Psalm 104, verse 4. Then that psalm is quoted in Hebrews 1 and commented upon in Hebrews 1. So you could say it's 3 verses, but they all collapse into one because they're all based on Psalm 104, 4. And that's where it talks about that God makes his angels. Well, something which some translate as spirit, right? So, but many versions translate it as winds. Okay, so why is that? Well, interestingly enough, again, since it's stated in the Hebrew Psalm and quoted in the Greek Hebrews, chapter 1, it is the case that in Hebrew, the term, there's a term in Hebrew and a term for Greek, both of which can either refer to spirit or wind or breath, right? That's ruach in Hebrew or pneuma in Greek. So in both languages, you have an option of translations. So then how should it be translated? Well, if you look at Psalm 104, just go and read it when you have time. You'll notice the entire psalm is constantly making references to natural phenomena. And so when it comes to the portion about angels, the context is really forcing you to translate the term as winds. Okay, so let me just give you a taste of that psalm. It talks about waters, it talks about clouds, winds, flaming fire, earth, the deep, waters, mountains, again, mountains, valleys, on and on and on it goes. So again, the context is natural phenomena, a correlation to natural phenomena. So when you get to, he makes his messengers, you need to translate it as winds because that's what's fitting to the context. And so that does away with the one and only place in the whole entire Bible you could ever hope to get that angels or spirit. And incidentally, let's be careful to note that there's a huge difference between spirit and spiritual, right? So angels could be spiritual, but they're not spirits, right? Because Jesus says a spirit has not flesh and bone. So what are angels? Well, every single time the Bible actually describes them, they're described as looking exactly like human male with no wings, right? No wings, no halo. So why is it common to take every single description of angels looking just like human males, shove that aside, and then build a whole theory about what they are on one questionable verse or one questionable rendering of a verse? You see the problem? It's
Yeah, I do.
lopsided. It's lopsided.
Hey, I wanted to see,
So,
Ken,
yes.
as we keep going on, I had one comment. Is there any way to get a little bit closer to the speaker just so we can kind of even out your voice on there?
Yeah, I do have headsets on and the microphone is right up to my mouth.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, perfect.
Try to shove it a little bit closer, but it's right there in my face.
Okay, perfect. That's perfect.
But as I talk, I'll see if maybe I can find a way through Zoom to turn up the volume on the microphone. I don't know if there is, but I'll check. So what are angels? Well, if they're always described as looking like human males, there's also no place in the whole entire Bible that talks about them taking on a human form. It's just not there. It doesn't exist. And so we should conclude that they are, as the way I look at it, they're as physical as Jesus is post-resurrection, meaning they can walk, they can be touched, they can eat, but they also have added abilities, right? Like access to other realms or dimensions or whatever we want to call them, such as that they can suddenly be seen and then not be seen, right? So that's the way I look at them. And it seems to me that the majority of these beings that we think of as being spirit, like seraphim and cherubim as well, they're not actually spirit. They're spiritual beings. They're not spirit. And yet there are spirit beings mentioned in the Bible, like evil spirits, wicked spirits, lying spirits. There are those, but angels, seraphim, and cherubim are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you brought up something really interesting that I hadn't really thought of because maybe because I'm a female, I had pictured angels also being female, but now that I think about it, and you just brought it up, there's not a single instance in the Bible where they have a female angel appear. So that's just my thoughts. It's really, we have Michael. I think if we go outside of the Bible, there's Raphael and Gabriel, and those are the good angels. And, you know, then we have Lucifer, who I think is, I mean, what do you classify Lucifer as? Is he a fallen angel, or what is he?
No, he is not a fallen angel. He is a fallen cherub.
So
right?
what's the difference? Because I don't actually know
Right.
the difference between cherub and angel.
Yeah, so to begin with, it's a simple fact that they have different titles: angel, seraph, and cherub. I mean, that right there makes a difference. And then the fact that their job functions are different. So again, angel are messengers. Cherubim are what is known in the literature as guardians, generally throne guardians. And we can see that in the Bible, because the first time the word cherub appears, it's when we're told that cherubim were stationed at the entrance to the Garden of Eden to guard the way into it, right? And then we see them in Ezekiel chapters 1 and chapter 10 as being in that animated throne, right? The cherubim are around that throne. And so particularly in Ezekiel 28 is where we see that the lamentation is given over to a being who is referred to as an anointed guardian cherub, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the one that you were in Eden, the garden of God. So it's undeniable that's speaking of Satan. So he's a fallen cherub. And then cherubim, 4 wings, 4 faces. So very different than angels.
Okay,
And
so now if we go back to looking at the Ark of the Covenant, I go back to the Ark of the Covenant.
yes.
So what is, because they had statues in that Ark of the Covenant, and I've heard, before we get into that, I've heard an argument from, I believe it was Brent Petrie, who's a Catholic. And I think he made the argument that we're not supposed to praise statues. And the fact that some statues in the form of, I believe, cherubs or something appeared in the Ark of the Covenant, according to his argument from a Catholic perspective, that means that those aren't real beings, because he's saying that that would go against this idea of worship, like praising or you know, having a statue around.
Oh goodness, no. And I hate to pull the Jew card, but I'm a Jew, so this is very dear to my heart. Maybe I'll tell you a little
You pull the
story.
Jew card because you have more knowledge of the Old Testament than, I mean, I love that card.
And I know you have a Catholic background, so don't take this the wrong way, but I did work at a Catholic church for almost half a decade. And one day I was actually in the church and they handed me a vase of flowers and told me, yeah, put it in front of the statue of Mary over there. And I wouldn't do it. Okay, and I explained, well, look, having the image is one thing, but when you're asking me to, in an honorary fashion, place this before the image, that's something I can't do. I can't cross that line. So that's the difference to me. But I'm so glad you mentioned the ark, because that's very important. So what was atop the ark on the mercy seat itself? It was not angels, it was cherubim. So that means you can throw away 99.9% of every depiction of the ark you've ever seen, because it's always humanoid beings with 2 wings, and that doesn't exist. So unless they're 6 wings, 4 wings, 4 faces, then the depiction is inaccurate. But now there are the only, okay, the command is not against making images, it's against making images to serve them. The only image that is absolutely forbidden is an image of God, because there's no image that could possibly contain God, right? That's the only image that you can actually not make, no matter for what reason. Other images, well, they're commanded to be made all over the Old Testament. Of cherubim for the ark. Solomon also made additional cherubim images for the temple. There are images like the menorah, which is a depiction of a budding almond tree. There's depictions on the coverings for the movable tent of the tabernacle. There's all kinds of Moses himself made an image of a serpent, and Jesus references it. So the issue wasn't the image, it was what it was done with it, which is why later in Israeli history, when people began worshiping that serpent Moses made, it was destroyed. It was called Nehushtan, just a piece of brass, a piece of copper, and it was destroyed. So that's where we can't get confused, is the only forbidden image is that of God, and any other image can be made, but it cannot be served. That's the difference.
Yeah, no, that makes, and actually the interesting thing about that is we're supposed to be made in the image of God. And so we shouldn't be out there making, we don't need to go out and make images because we're all made in that image. So we have that little advantage. I want to say, so at this point, when talking about angels again and talking about their role, so we know that according to a lot of different scholars that angels are messengers, and we also know that angels are serving as some sort of protection. And that was this idea when the Satan with Jesus, when he was tempting Jesus, he basically said, okay, do this, throw yourself down, do that sort of thing, and your angels will come and rescue you. And so what do you make of all that?
I think that there is what some people would term guardian angels. I'm not exactly sure how that is broken down in terms of is it one per person? um, are they guarding us by city, by state, by nation, or do they even follow human conventions of where we arbitrarily form our boundaries? That I'm not sure,
So
because
you're
the
looking
Bible's
at
just not
something.
very.
Yeah, you're looking at, actually, I think that's what you just said, just reminded me of something. I just want to say it really quickly. You reminded me of man-on-man defense versus zone defense in football, right? So you're saying, was it zone
Yeah.
defense? Are they guarding a city? Are they guarding a house? Or are they guarding
Right.
people? And so
Right.
I've heard Michael Heiser say something really interesting about this. And he was talking about demons are really low level. And so you have the lowest level. They're just, and he was talking about demons coming out of the Nephilim, and these demons are basically trying to go in and they need a host, ruining people's spirits, doing things like that. But then you get this idea of a higher level of spirit, and speaking to the book of Ephesians and what Paul said about these hierarchies of
Right.
dark forces. And at some hierarchy, he said at the highest hierarchy in the dark forces, we're looking at this dark force that basically is going to be trying to figure out how to get to our politicians and our media to try to influence a culture or even the world, versus going and influencing one single person or a household or something like that. So what do you
Yes.
think of that sort of thing?
Well, right. I mean, so we're told of various levels, I suppose, of how the heavenly hierarchy is laid out. But the problem is we're not, so that's just mentioned and listed. We're not told how that breaks down specifically. That's why I was saying I couldn't say if they're looking over nations or states or however they do it, or then what happens if you're in a certain location and you move to another state or another country? Does your guardian angel travel with you? Or are you then under the watchful care of a different angel? You see what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
that is not really broken down in the Bible. But what the Bible does tell us is that our main problem is threefold: the world, the flesh, and the devil. So um, for any given problem, it could be a variety of things. So is it that these fallen beings, and I would like to eventually talk about demons a little bit, is it that they are influencing behind the scenes? I would say no question about it. But that there we have other problems. Again, it could be your flesh. It could be just the temptations of the world, or it could be that that's not a false trichotomy, but it's a sort of a combination punch, right? And all together. So it's difficult to say in any given scenario what exactly is going on. But I do think that from chapters like Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 and a few others, like Daniel, like you mentioned, we do get the sense that behind a human sovereign, there will be a spiritual sovereign. Whether one is called a king and the other a prince sometimes seems to change. But regardless, the entire, we saw that. In Egypt, we see that. In
Mm-hmm.
like we mentioned before, Michael being one of the chief princes of Daniel's people. And then, anyhow, I wrote a whole chapter in very much detail about how that is absolutely the case.
Good. And I'm going to put a link, I'm going to get a link to your book so I can link them in there. But you just reminded me of something since you mentioned the book of Daniel. And it's something that I think the audience would probably be interested in hearing about, is this idea that when you're talking about Michael, what happened was Daniel was suddenly Michael appeared to Daniel and told him that he'd been trying to get in touch with him, but he was unable to because this Prince of Persia, which
Right.
was also one of these dark spiritual forces, had blocked him for 24 days. And so I think that's kind of fascinating, just speaking to, again, let's look at the hierarchy of these beings that were in control of these other places, especially during the time between Babel and the Pentecost, when we have, and this idea with Jesus is he's going to spread out and overcome a lot of these different places. And so we still have, I think we still have a presence today going on in this world at all these different hierarchies. And I would say that there are certainly some world leaders that seem to be influenced by dark spirits. Like if we look at Kim Jong-un, sorry, Kim Jong, but that's true. But that's, what do you think about this idea of today? Do we think, because I think the churches today try to downplay this whole role of demons back in the New Testament, for example, with the demons rushing into the pigs and they're exorcising demons and doing all that kind of stuff. I don't think the church plays it up. And I think people basically make fun of people. If you say, hey, I do believe in demons, you'll have 10 atheists jumping on the truck to say, you're wrong, there's no such thing as demons. And you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of dark forces out there influencing people in negative ways that seem illogical and irrational. Sometimes that's how the way these people act. And so, which to me speaks to some sort of a demonic influence. And I don't know, do you think that there's still a presence today of angels, demons, any of that kind of stuff?
First, just a note of pedantic correction. It was Gabriel who was fighting the Prince of Persia for 21 days, and then he had to call on Michael
that's
to help
right.
him out.
Thank you.
So anyhow, yes, I think the main problem is just what I was hinting at before, which is just imbalance, right? So yes, I definitely affirm that this is still going on, but that means I need to be all the more careful about claiming it. So can I know absolutely when some ruler does something that it was the world, the flesh, or the devil, or a demon, or whatever? That would be the difficult. And so I think that the problem comes in when we say, well, there's a demon behind every bush, and I got a flat tire. That was the demon of flat tire. And so we overdo it, right? Whereas the other end of the scale would be, yeah, it's all over with. There's no paranormal, and it's all just either accidents or something else. So I think that's the main problem, is that we humans tend to function in extremes. And so, and the more the extremes manifest, the more they push each other away from each other, the more extreme they become, right? So that's why you end up with things like Christians denying anything paranormal going on in Genesis 6, and then Christians turning Genesis 6 into sci-fi. That's the problem right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. People are taking extremes. You can't say, I mean, I would hardly say Satan is going to come down to the level of a single person and start attacking a single person, unless that single person is some sort of a world leader and there's some massive influence. But I don't think on a day-to-day basis, I'm going to be dealing with Satan. But people always say, oh, Satan made me do it. Well, no, it's probably there's other demonic forces under Satan that would be influencing people in negative ways. And that's even according to Ephesians. And so yeah, I think that there are influences, but again, like you're saying, you can't constantly try to take the blame off yourself too and say it's not my decision. I was influenced by some negative force. That's not fair either.
Right. You know what? It occurred to me. We talked about angels and cherubim, and I'd like to get the demons, but we need to mention seraphim a little bit as well. Now,
Sure,
Seraphim are a very challenging topic because they only appear in one text. So I somehow managed to squeeze a whole chapter out of that into my book, but it was very rewarding. And I think that there's some basic level issues that are simple to understand and that end up creating problem if we don't nail them down. So for instance, we're told that it's in Isaiah 6, and you see seraphim describes them as having 6 wings and describes them as having feet, face, and hands. All right. So the issue is that because the term seraph is also used of certain kinds of serpents, people tend to think that seraphim are reptilian or serpentine or something, but there's really no biblical indication of that. Even if later in history you can look at Egyptian hieroglyphs, see some really odd ones like a snake with 2 legs and wings. Okay, whatever that might be about. When a being has a face, hands, feet, and wings, you and is not described as serpentine, I don't think that you can insert that into the text, because somewhere in one of the definitions of the root word, it also applies to snakes. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
The difference
So where
is
does seraphim appear again? I didn't hear what you
Isaiah
said.
6.
Okay, Isaiah 6.
Basically, seraph. So for instance, in English, we have various words for snake. You can say serpent, and then you get categories. You can say viper, right? There's different terms. Seraph is used of poisonous serpents. And it seemed to me that within the context of Isaiah 6, you can see why they're also referred to as seraphim, because what's being described there is they're interacting with the fire in God's temple in heaven. And so I ended up calling them something to the likes of keepers of the eternal flame, just because that appears to be their job function. They're flying around God saying Kodesh, 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 right? They're saying holy, holy, holy. And then the function that you actually see them do is going up to the flame, the fire, the fiery altar, and picking up coal and putting it in Isaiah's mouth as a sign of cleansing. So that seems to me why there's a correlation to seraph, not because the reptiles and these beings are serpentine, but because one is thought of as related to fire, and so is the other one in terms of that poisonous serpent's bite. Feels like it stings, right? Like a fiery stinging. And you could also say it's because of the way serpents move, right? A very undulating sort of flame-like movement. So to me, that there's nothing really there to think that they're reptilian or anything like that. I think there's more mundane correlations we can make with them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting symbolism with the idea of snakes through the Bible. And I think, like, going back to the very first few verses in Genesis, not for few verses, but the first part of the Bible in Genesis with the serpent, which is representative to me of Satan. And I know some people have argued against that, but then we also see the reference to the serpent in Revelation, again referring to Satan.
Yes.
And so that's a clear, direct revelation saying, yes, the serpent is Satan. And so it's interesting to think about serpents themselves and what qualities they have, and why Satan is the one associated with the serpent, because you kind of think of serpent as sneaky, deceitful. They can bite, but then we also have the idea that in Genesis of Jesus basically stepping on the head of the serpent and the serpent snapping at his feet. I think it was Jesus, or it's Mother Mary. I'm getting confused on that. So, but then, because I'm picturing also going back to my Catholic heritage of a vision of Mother Mary standing on top of a serpent head.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I know. I know why you're thinking that way, because it's definitely speaking of Jesus in Genesis 3, but I know a lot of Catholic Bibles will put her. So they're making you think that it's Mary.
Yeah, that's where I'm pretty sure it's Jesus. He will snap at your feet.
Oh yeah.
So that's, but I have a question here from Susan, and it says, cute question. Is seraphim just plural of seraph? Could there be more than one being alluded to?
Oh, well, definitely. Certainly it's more than one of these category of being called seraph. Yeah, seraphim would imply that there's more than one of them, just like there's more than one cherub. There are cherubim.
Cherubim.
So,
Okay.
we know at least one cherub fell And so apparently there's others that are still quite loyal, just like angels. Some of them fell and most are loyal.
Let's talk about, I also heard something interesting today, or yesterday was it maybe, but I heard it from Heiser. I've been just like inhaling his videos in a crazy way, but I was listening to what he was saying about the Nephilim and this whole idea that here's just, let me quickly lay this out. So what I heard him say, and I haven't gone back and looked at the passages related to this, although I do kind of remember them, but he was also going into the book of Enoch and some other books I haven't studied in detail at all, or even read, come to think of it. But he was basically talking about these Nephilim being the sons of God coming down and getting these daughters of man pregnant, and then having these giants, and these giants were sort of evil Nephilim, and they were the ones who were around prior to the flood. And then what happened was the flood occurred, and according to Michael Heiser, some of these Nephilim were somehow around after. They had gone down to the underworld. That was where they were populating, and they were demons essentially. And they were also teaching the daughters of man to do these things that were, they were teaching them knowledge of heaven that people should not know on this earth at this point. And so I thought that was kind of fascinating, and this whole idea of giants, and that being one of the reasons for the flood. And then this idea that they're still around after the flood in some way. And so have you given any thought to that?
That is one of my favorite subjects, and depends how you count them. I've probably written 4 or 6 books about that issue, or
Oh,
those
wow.
issues, I should say. So I guess the question would be, how much time do we have? Because if you get me started on that, it's going to kind of take over everything.
Well, I think that is a very interesting topic. I think people would like to know more about it because it's alluded to in the book, but there's also some exterior stuff apparently. And this is why I've just ordered 3 books from Michael Heiser, because apparently he's done this in detail, looked into Enoch and how this corresponds. And so the fact that you've looked into some of this stuff. So what's your take on the whole thing? Do you believe that it's possible that these sons of God could come down and even impregnate the daughters of man?
One of the main reasons for understanding Genesis 6 as referring to angels when it refers to sons of God, the most direct way would be Job 38:7, where the sons of God are absolutely not human, no question about it. Then you can jump to Jude and 2 Peter 2, where they both refer to the sin of angels, and they both set that sin to a timeline which is pre-flood, which fits Genesis 6. Okay. Now, given what I reviewed about angels, which is that they are not spirit, but that they are physical in a glorified and or what we would think of as resurrected manner, then yes, there's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't be able to marry women and mate with them. And in fact, why is it that it's only male sons of God and only female daughters of men? Well, the angel view explains that. It's because angels are always described as being like human males. Now that's called the angel view. And in one of my books, I proved that it is the majority original and traditional view amongst the earliest Jews and Christians alike for centuries. There's no question about that. So then what happens is, now you mentioned something extremely important, that the Bible, I wouldn't say makes very explicit, but most people think that the flood had something to do with Nephilim, right?
Yes.
And so maybe even if we even say perhaps part of the reason for the flood, as a speculation, had to do with God wanting to be rid of the Nephilim, right?
Yeah,
so then if there's post-flood Nephilim, that implies that God failed, and they thought of a loophole, and they got one over on God, right? He sought to get rid of them. He sent the flood, but by golly, somehow they managed to come back. So I guess God couldn't get the job done. See the problem there?
Yes, of course. So what is and maybe that's the reason why the church doesn't play this up so much. I mean, we don't hear, I've never even heard about the Nephilim until recently. Pretty old. It's just
Well,
hearing about the
but
Nephilim in the last 5 years. So,
you know why? Because biblically, Nephilim are a non-issue, period. Okay, so now let me just point out every single verse where Nephilim are mentioned in the Bible, okay? Every single one of them. Okay, you ready for this list?
sure.
Genesis 6:4, and Numbers 13:33, period, full stop. That's
Okay,
it.
so they're only in a couple verses. They're not in that much, huh?
That's it. Now, and that's why, because biblically they're a non-issue. Now, I know that some people's heads are exploding, and I'll explain why. One is a sort of very low-hanging fruit problem, which is that some people are reading English versions that use the term giants, and they're chasing an English word around the Hebrew Bible, and they're correlating every verse where giants are mentioned, and then they're creating some sort of theory based on that. That is fundamentally fallacious. Because to begin with, English term giant is a vague, generic, subjective, and undefined term. So if you jump into the middle of a discussion about giants without defining that term, you're going to go nowhere fast. And I can think of at least 4 different things that could be meant by giant. So it has to be defined. The other issue is the term in English, giant, comes from the Greek gigantes, which is used in the Septuagint, right? The LXX. My problem with what the Septuagint translators did is, well, they weren't exactly translating, they were rendering at this point, because they render 3 different Hebrew words as gigantes. And it's always a terrible idea to render more than one word with just one word, because then you end up correlating things that were never meant to be correlated. So the Septuagint renders Nephilim as gigantes, it renders Gibborim as gigantes, and it renders Rephaim as gigantes. And so the English translators who follow the Septuagint, they just switch from gigantes to giant, and now you have 3 different categories: Nephilim, Gibborim, Rephaim, all referred to as giants, but you can't just say they're the same because the same English or Greek word are used. You need to look at the context. Mm-hmm. So for one, let's get rid of Gibborim, because that's merely I know a lot of people, for some really strange reason, think that the Gibborim are a people group. They're not. It's just a word that means mighty. So Gibbor or Gibborim is used to refer to the Nephilim as being mighty, but it's also used of angels as being mighty, of human beings as being mighty, of God being mighty. It's used all over the place. Gibborim are not a people group. It's a word that means might.
No, that makes, I mean, I can see your point, because I'm thinking of other words that we've done the same thing with, like with the word yom, Y-O-M.
Yes.
And this idea of day and it being taken in, whether it's 24-hour day, or is it a day and age, or is it something like back in the day? So there's all these different ways to take the same word. And so there's some level of ambiguity in the Bible when you see that kind of stuff, especially in these English translations, because we're not exactly sure what it means. And so I think I can see your point, where we have some, I mean, go back to the idea of Goliath. Goliath was considered a giant, but was Goliath considered one of the Nephilim, I should say? I don't think so, right?
Oh, no, not at all. He is specified to have been a Repha. He is by definition of the Rephaim. So no, not only was he not a Nephil, he could not have been, as I'm working my ways towards showing that there's no such thing as post-flood Nephilim. So he not only wasn't, he could not have been.
Good. And I saw, actually, I just want to mention this really quickly from Malcolm Gladwell. I was watching a video on Goliath and David, and it was kind of fascinating because they talked about something that I'd never thought of. And this idea of, we always talk about the metaphor of the small guy like David somehow being overcome, or being able to overcome a giant with his slingshot shot between the eyes and a rock. And what's interesting that Malcolm Gladwell, and this is going off on a quick tangent, but what Malcolm Gladwell said in this video is, they looked at the disease that they guessed that Goliath must have had, that's consistent with the disease that a lot of people who have giantism today have, which basically renders their eyes, they can hardly see. They're mainly blind, pretty much. And this idea where if you go back to the story and you listen to Goliath, he keeps calling David forward to get closer to him so that Goliath can actually see him well. And as David's approaching, he thinks David's carrying a number of different sticks, but really David only has one stick. But in his vision, because it's so messed up, he thinks that he's carrying more sticks. And so one of the reasons why David was able to get to him is because he identified the weakness that actually this particular disease gives a person. And so that was kind of a fascinating thing. So when he shot him with the slingshot and he fell down, it wasn't because it wasn't so much the small guy versus the big guy. It was the small guy versus the big guy who had a serious problem with seeing. And so he was unable to see what was coming at him. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating.
Yes, it is an interesting thing to point out. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
So I'm glad. So you're basically saying that, okay, the Nephilim were here before the flood, but you're saying that they weren't here after the flood. And one of the reasons, if I could just summarize what you were saying, one of the reasons we can be confident in that is because the use of the word giant in the English translations has been misapplied to mean Nephilim to some people, whereas it really was just a translation of a number of different words and a number of different types of people and beings that were around after the flood. Is that correct assessment? Or
yes, except you do get one reference to Nephilim post-flood. So that's something we're going to have to work our way towards.
Okay, so what's the reference? What did they do post-flood, or what do we have post-flood?
Yeah, so again, let's just reiterate. They existed pre-flood. We're told only 8 people survived the flood and some animals. So then you literally have to invent non-biblical stories about how it is that they either survived or returned. And let me emphasize that. By definition, you are going to be forced to invent things that the Bible doesn't say, because now you're latched into this theory. And so you're going to have to come up with something, right? So at this point, let's jump to Numbers 13. And hopefully you'll only read you'll only read Numbers 13, verse 33, and then you'll run away from that text so you won't notice anything about it. Because the verse is supposed to be impressive. You really shouldn't be reading it for context.
Well, what does it say? Do you have it in front of you?
Yes. I'm going to read the KJV because I just have that here.
Okay.
There we saw giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so were we in their sight. So there, let me just throw the word in. There we saw Nephilim, the sons of Anak, which come from the Nephilim, and we were in our own sights as grasshoppers, and so were we in their sights. Okay, so with that, you're supposed to just build an entire over-encompassing, overarching theory of post-flood Nephilim because of one verse. And hermeneutically, that's inappropriate. Building a whole doctrine on one verse, especially one that's so overarching, that's going to somehow get Nephilim past the flood in whichever way you want to invent that they did so. Whether it's more falls of more angels, which is not biblical, or that the genetics made it through in one of the daughters of Noah's sons, which is also unbiblical. Numbers 13 is the mother of all Nephilim texts, all 2 of them. And the issue is that it becomes a hermeneutic in and of itself. It becomes literally a worldview, so that now anytime you read anything in the whole entire Bible about quote unquote giants, you read it within the lens of this one single verse, and you also go back to Genesis 6 and you read chapter 4 according to this verse. So let me go back to that for a sec. Genesis 4, there were giants, okay, Nephilim, in the earth in those days and also after that. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bare to them. The same became mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So now, because of Numbers 33, you're supposed to ignore what this verse told you, and you're supposed to say, oh, those days and after that, that means the flood. Well, no. This is verse 4 of Genesis 6. The flood is not even mentioned for the very first time until verse 17, a full 13 verses later. So what were those days and after that? Well, the verse tells you, in those days and after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. Well, when was that? Well, verse 1 tells us, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that daughters of men were fair, and they took them wives of all they chose. So the verse tells you what it means by those days after that. It's when they first started doing it, and thereafter they continued doing it, but that's all pre-flood. The flood is what brought an end to that. So when did men begin to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them? I certainly don't know, but it could be as early as when Adam and Eve's children started having children. But the point is, the immediate and greater context of Genesis 6:4 is not the flood. It is when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. And verse 1 told you, verse 1 and 2, they told you when it's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so then Numbers 13, how come there's a reference to Nephilim? So to begin with, it's not good enough to say, well, the Bible says post-flood Nephilim because they were seen in Numbers 13:33. No, you can't say, well, God inspired that's what is written there. Well, yes, but the issue is who said it, why did they say it, what's the context, what's their narrative, and what was the reaction to it. So if you don't mind, I'll plow through this really quickly.
Oh, sure.
The narrative of chapter 13 is that spies were sent into the land. They come back. First thing they talk about is that the land is good. They show some of the fruits of the land. And then they mention that the people of the land are, pay attention here now, they're strong. Okay. And they mention that they saw various people groups, right? Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Canaanites, you name it. And then they talk about how they have strong, they have cities and they're well fortified, walls and everything. Okay. So now obviously they're intimidated because these guys are itinerant wilderness tent dwellers. And now they're seeing these cities with great, huge walls surrounding them and strong people who are defending them. That's intimidating. So 10 of the spies start discouraging the people, right? They're saying we're not going to be able to do what God commanded us to do. Then Caleb encourages the people. Now here the narration tells us something incredibly important. Verse 32, and they brought up an evil report of the land. Okay. Now in the evil report, all of a sudden, remember they had given a good report of the land, but in their evil report, they speak ill of the land. In the initial report, they claimed that the people of the land were strong. All of a sudden, in the evil report, they claimed that the people were all of great stature. And while in the original report, they listed many people groups that they saw, all of a sudden, oopsie, they just now remember, oh yeah, guess what? We also saw Nephilim. So in other words, The first report they made is taken as is. Good land, good fruit, people in the land, they're strong, well fortified. Okay. The problem is, well, we shouldn't do what God commanded us. Caleb says, yes, we can. And then we're told of the evil report in which they contradict themselves. They add information they had, for some odd reason, forgotten to mention. They make three claims about which the whole entire rest of the Bible knows absolutely nothing, which is one, that there's post-flood Nephilim, two, that Anakim are related to Nephilim, and three, that Nephilim are extremely tall. They make those three claims. That's nowhere else in the whole Bible. And so one last thing on this is that in making these claims, they also contradict Moses, they contradict Caleb, they contradict Joshua, and they contradict God, because all of them affirm that Anakim were in the land, but none of them ever say one single word about Nephilim ever, nor relation to them ever. So in your daily life, SJ, would you believe somebody who's self-contradictory, who's obviously adding stuff to their report in order to make it seem more credible and scary?
Yeah, no, I can totally exactly see what you're saying. I want to ask one clarification point
Yes.
before I summarize what I believe you just said. But are you saying that in the Genesis, and I haven't read this closely, so I can't answer this myself, which is why I'm asking for clarification. Are you saying that in Genesis that the Nephilim were never told, we were never told that Nephilim are very tall?
This is the only description we have of Nephilim.
Okay.
We're told who their parents are, and we're told that they became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Period. Full stop.
Okay, so that's all we're told in Genesis. So
Period.
then, so I get what you're saying is completely makes a lot of sense. So basically what it is they wanted to scare them. So they just said, hey, the Nephilim are here. And so it's
Absolutely.
it's like us going out there and saying, you guys can't go into here because there's a bunch of, man, these guys are the toughest guys you ever saw. Well,
Yeah.
who are the toughest guys? Oh, the Nephilim are here. That's who's here. Yeah. So it just sounds like a bunch of BS.
It's a don't go in the woods type of tall tale.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Let me point something else out, because a lot of people will claim the evil report is referred to as evil because it was discouraging. But wait a minute, the discouragement took place before it is specified that they're reporting an evil report. So the contents of the evil report are self-contradictory, add information that's nowhere else in the whole Bible, and they changed the story, and they were rebuked for it. Now, another, okay, I'm just gonna have to, there's a textual issue here as well, okay. It appears that most of verse 33 is actually a gloss, because if you look at the Septuagint for verse 33, the key points are not there. Now, what reinforces that this might be mostly a gloss is if we look at what Caleb states about this event in Deuteronomy 128, the way he interacts with this is as per the version of the Septuagint, not the version in the Masoretic. So in other words, that might be a little confusing, but the reaction that Caleb has to it in Deuteronomy 128 is as the reading is found in the Septuagint, which means that this portion of the specific claim wasn't even actually made by these rebuked spies. That's just a textual issue, though. And let me, I'm going to have to just be a little bit blunt here. Michael Heiser has obviously done a tremendous amount of very helpful work in every area referring to the paranormal realm. However, he's not infallible. And my problem is that he does not interact with this narrative. What he does is says, hey, look, verse 33 mentions Nephilim, therefore Nephilim existed post-flood, and then he's often running with it. You know, with all due regard and discretion, with all due respect to his scholarship, and I've appreciated tons of it, this is definitely an area where there's a fundamental issue, which is failing to interact with this text. So then what happens is, because this text correlates Anakim with Nephilim, which again isn't found anywhere else, anywhere in the Bible, then all of a sudden, all Anakim can be called Nephilim. And since Anakim are a subgroup of Rephaim, then for some very strange reason I don't understand, all of a sudden you can refer to all Rephaim as Nephilim. And so all of a sudden you can see Nephilim all over the Bible when they're not there. Rephaim are just good old-fashioned human beings. There's no indication anywhere in the whole Bible that they are anything other than that. There's no correlation.
That's interesting. And yeah, I do fear that when people do take what is it? I mean, I'm wondering where he got that from. So I'm wondering if he got it from a different book outside of the Bible, like Enoch, because those are the books I ordered of his that I haven't read obviously yet. And so I'm wondering if he had that interpretation from someplace else outside of the Bible. And have you read the book of Enoch?
I wrote a book about the book of Enoch.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's part. I think you hit the nail on the head. So I'm not exaggerating when I say that this one single verse becomes a worldview and a hermeneutic, because when you look at this verse, then you're going to reread Genesis 6:4, and then you're going to reread any and every reference to Anakim or Rephaim, and then you're going to start importing apocryphal and also pseudepigraphical texts and say, well, those also touch upon these issues. Now, I've always been puzzled at how, and actually maybe this will get us into the issue of demons as well. I'm always puzzled about how it is that in Jubilees and also Ethiopic Enoch, how it is that post-flood Nephilim can be said to have been very, very, very tall, when we're actually told that they are dead and demons are Nephilim spirits, and spirits cannot be very, very tall. They're not, they're spirits. They're not walking around doing anything.
Yeah.
They're functioning, but not in a physical manner.
So let me, I'm looking at.
Let me just throw this in really quick. The only apocrypha or pseudepigrapha really where you even get post-flood Nephilim are Ethiopic Enoch, where they only make it through in spirit form, and Jubilees, where they only make it to the time of Noah's grandsons, and that's it.
Okay.
And incidentally, there's also no indication in the whole entire Bible that there'll be any sort of return of the Nephilim in the eschaton, the end times either. Nothing, period.
That's interesting. I want to say, because Sentinel Apologetics, he's Rob, my friend. He says he's confused. He wants to know what the criticism is of Heiser. And let me just state what I think you're saying, and then if you could say if that's right. But what I think you're saying is that you're discounting the fact that okay. Number one, Heiser is saying that there was a post-flood Nephilim, and he's using various verses, that one you mentioned right there from Numbers, and also he's maybe looking at Enoch and the Ethiopian Enoch and those sort of things. And you're saying that if you look at the passage that does mention the Nephilim, it really is just an exaggeration, that people are, trying to give an account of why not to go to war with these people, because the people included the Nephilim, which was just a scare tactic, essentially. And so you're saying that the Nephilim did not exist after the flood. And so I think that's what I'm getting.
First of all, Rob, let me say I listen to you all the time. I really do enjoy listening to your show, by the way, Rob. I'm saying that if the one and only reference to post-flood Nephilim is in one of the most problematic single verses in the Bible, then you have to seriously rethink it, because it's coming out of the mouth of unfaithful, disloyal, self-contradictory, rebuked spies who also contradict Moses, Caleb, Joshua, God, and the whole entire rest of the Bible. And the key feature of what they said in the Masoretic might actually be a gloss on top of it. Just look at Deuteronomy 128. There's so many problems with this single verse that honestly, just reading the narrative for what it is should be enough to discount it. It is being recorded to us that these guys were not being honest. That's the bottom line.
Hmm. No, that's
And,
fascinating.
and so going back to, because Rob was specifically asking about my points about Heiser, that's what I'm saying, is that if you read Heiser's writings, he fails to interact with a narrative of chapter 30 of Numbers. He essentially jumps to verse 33 and is often running with that into everything else.
Hmm.
And but this is, by the way, why I always end up in the middle, because you know how we talked about there's extremes, right? So when it comes to these issues, there's one extreme that claims there's nothing paranormal here. Genesis 6 is not about angels, and so Nephilim were not hybrid. And then there's the other extreme of like what I call sci-fi theology, which just goes off into the wildest territory. Well, I ended up right in the middle of those two. So both sides beat up on me. I do affirm the angel view, but I deny both flood Nephilim. I'm kind of always getting beat up, but so be it. Here I stand. I can do no other.
I think it makes it interesting when we do debate these kind of things, because it does get other people interested in the topic when there's a debate. And so it makes you want to study your side and understand it and realize that, hey, maybe there's more to it, or maybe there's less, or whatever it is. I want to say Sentinel added one thing. He says, I've heard this criticism before, but Heiser does anticipate this by noticing the extra YOD in Numbers 13 in the Nephilim word that connects it back to Genesis 6. I'm not familiar with YOD means, but.
Well, look, I mean, we can talk about spelling conventions or root words all we want. It is being connected to Genesis 6. There's no question about it. Who is doing that connection is the issue, and what was the reaction to it, and in which manner are they doing so? I have no question in my mind that these spies were correlating it to what by then would have been something in the Jewish tradition, or the Israeli, or the Jewish tradition, which is that they were well aware that Nephilim had existed, no question about it. And these spies are pointing back to that tradition. That's not the issue. The issue is that they were claiming to have seen them, and there's no indication that they actually did.
And just to add one more, because Rob's got some more, and unfortunately, I am totally, this is beyond my pay grade here. So he says, also the Rephaim and Shadim, the Nephilim demons, go right into Ezekiel's vocabulary of the Goberim, underworld giants, in Ezekiel 32:27 onward. Are you familiar with that?
I'm going to have to say, Rob, you need to invite me on your channel, because we could just take over SJ's whole discussion here and delving into these issues. But I think the bottom line is there are at least two usages of Repha in the Bible. And Repha is a very complicated word. It has a range of meaning all the way from healing to death. All right. And so sometimes it's used of a people group, like I said, a main category of people under which are subgroups such as Anakim. And sometimes it's used of healing, or what Rob is getting at, it's used of the dead. So we need to get away from what might be the thought that one word can only mean one thing. I know Rob knows better than that, and I know that's not his argument, because he is definitely
well, we'll definitely have to have, because I want to get Rob on here too at some point, and maybe plan a little ahead, and you could always come back on, and we could all kind of have at it. I'm not as familiar as you two, so I'd just be sort of the listener. And so that would be a lot of fun.
We could also discuss the issue of giants, which to me is a different issue, but we need to just touch upon the issue of demons for a second here.
Yeah, my take now, even if the Nephilim did appear just before the flood, even if we grant this idea that it was sort of made up, that they might have appeared after the flood, but even if we say that, there's still the existence of demons in the underworld that would have been the Nephilim, right? Because they don't get destroyed until the end of times, from my understanding.
Okay, one thing the Bible does not tell us anywhere whatsoever, not even a hint, is that demons are the spirits of dead Nephilim, period. That doesn't exist.
Okay, so there's nothing that says that wasn't there, I feel like maybe I got that from Heiser, where there's this idea that the Nephilim are demons.
That that comes from Jubilees and the Ethiopic Enoch. It does not
Okay.
come from the Bible.
Okay. Okay. I got it.
Now, I would say the idea that the demons are the spirits of dead Nephilim, I think it's a good try. I don't think it does the job, but I think it was a good speculation. But let's confirm what it is. It's apocryphal or pseudepigraphical folklore. That's what it is. Now, the issue is that the two main speculations about the identification or identity of demons is that they're either fallen angels or they're not. Okay, that's the basic two options.
Yeah. So what are they?
Yeah.
That's what we all want to know.
But why claim that they are not fallen angels? That would be because fallen angels or angels in general and demons exhibit different characteristics. So that's why it's generally thought that they are not the same. But if they're not fallen angels, then what are they? And so the folklore speculated that they're dead Nephilim. Okay, now, at this point, I'm going to say that I think that they are fallen angels, but in a roundabout way. And I'm going to have to ask you to pardon me because in my book, specifically about demons, it probably took me 30 pages to write out my argument. So I'll just give you the Reader's Digest version. So I make a biblical case that begins with the affirmation that angels are, again, as physical as Jesus is post-resurrection, right? We begin with that. Then what I see happening is that when the angels who fell were incarcerated, right, as per Jude and 2 Peter 2, my view is that their bodies are incarcerated while their spirit is what roams around as demons.
Wait, say that again. So you say that the incarcerated angels are their spirits are demons. Is that what you just said?
Right. So I'm saying that this is my Bible-based speculation about what they are. That to me seems like what I could put together from scripture. And it does explain a lot of things and a lot of the same things that people who believe in the demons as spirits of dead Nephilim would argue the same things, which is it makes sense because they want to be worshipped in the form of images like idols, right? Because they were once embodied and they kind of want to see themselves represented in a form. Some of them also seek to possess human beings, again, because they want to experience life they used to, which is being embodied. But also, if you notice, when Jesus confronts demons, they are absolutely terrified of being sent where? Into the abyss. So my speculation is the reason for that is because if they were sent into the abyss, they would then re-inhabit their bodies. But then what would happen? Well, then they'd be stuck down there for who knows how many millennia, right? They'd be stuck down there. They're incarcerated. Oh, they're getting in fights in the exercise yard. They're doing concentration curls, They're forming gangs. No, I'm kidding about that. But that would explain why they're terrified of being sent into the abyss, because that would mean re-embodiment and they're stuck. Now, as I said, the Bible says nothing about a return of Nephilim. I think it does tell us of a return of these fallen angels. And that's what I see in Revelation 9, when the abyss, the bottomless pit, is opened up. And we get very fanciful, symbolically rich descriptions of what comes out of there. I think that's when the demons reincarnate in their bodies, and they come out of the pit and they wreak havoc on the earth.
I think that's interesting. I want to before we go on, Rob is in the audience. Would you be okay if I brought Rob in here too, so we the three of us could all chat about this?
Sure, gladly.
Okay, awesome. So Rob, if you want to come in, I'm going to shoot you a link on Twitter, and so it's coming through in just a moment here. So So that's cool. So yeah, so because both of you have a lot of knowledge on this kind of stuff. It looks like he's been writing stuff and you've been writing stuff. So the only one who doesn't have all of the knowledge is me. So I'm going to benefit from these two people with all this knowledge. So it's fantastic. So we have let me just look and see if he's okay. So I don't see him here quite yet. So
incidentally, part of the envisioning that Revelation 9 is about demons re-inhabiting their bodies would explain why you would think that Revelation would be where demons are running amok all over the place doing all kinds of things. But that's one thing that you do not see. Demons are mentioned maybe only 3 times in Revelation, and it's almost like they're being referred to almost like a simile, like where that's probably why. It's because they're no longer demons. Now they're back to being the fallen angels. And we're not really told much about what they do. We know they come out of the pit. We know they wreak havoc on the earth for a while. And as far as I can tell, the next thing they do is they join Satan in their war in heaven against Michael and the loyal angels, which they lose, and then that's the end of them. That's the last you hear of them.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I think going back to this whole where we started, kind of we spin back to the beginning again. If we go back to this idea that they were sort of given free reign for a little while, the sons of God were given free reign over these nations that had been disinherited at Babel, and suddenly Jesus has been collecting up the nations again, as with the Great Commission and that sort of thing. He's gone out into all the nations and reclaimed them. And then this idea of, so what are the demons thinking? I mean, what are these dark forces, what are they thinking now? Because they know that Jesus now is in power. Jesus has been given reign over the heavens and the earth after his resurrection. Everything is belonging to Jesus. So why are they even doing what they're doing? Why don't they go away? Why don't they go away? Go away.
One interesting thing about demons is that they have different personalities. And if you notice when Jesus is talking about driving a strong man out of a person, then he says that when a spirit comes out of a man, he'll go and get, if he finds the place put in nice order, right? He'll go and get 7 spirits, what? More wicked than itself. Right? So that tells you that demons have different personalities. So the way I think of them is maybe some of them hang around families or, like I said, cities, states, nations, however they do it. And they're more like secretaries. They're just there observing, they're noting what's going on. They have a knowledge base. And then others are what we would call poltergeists, right? They're just causing problems. They're really violent. They're wanting to possess people. So there's all kinds, basically. But one thing that helped me when I was writing my book on Satan, I realized in terms of criminal profiling, it helped me not to think of Satan as somebody who was very, very angry. But when I started to think of him more in terms of being insane, that really, really helped. Because you're saying this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Well, okay. But when you're sort of drunk on your own power and you think you're,
I see Rob.
When you think you're unbeatable, you're just going to keep going down the track you're on.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting thing. What do you think of and Rob, hi, Rob. So welcome.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. And Rob, like I said before, I listen to your cast all the time.
Oh,
So
thank you.
You're speaking with a fan. You're not speaking with an antagonist.
Nah, not to worry. Not to worry. I'm literally at right now. I'm testing. I came across this idea. I wonder if I can use my DSLR to be used as a camera, and apparently this is it. It's working. It's so. Yeah.
No, that's good. Hey, I wanted to ask both of you, going back to this, I mean, just what's your take when we talk about these demons and angels and that sort of thing? But is there I know you're probably aware of places like you go to Savannah or you go to these different places, New Orleans, and they have all of these ghost rides and these ghost things where people go into people's houses and they say, these are the spirits of formerly living people, and they're occupying these houses as ghosts. And so I'm just wondering, now, is it possible that humans can turn into demons, or is that just a whole different thing, that there's a different dimension there?
I see no indication of that whatsoever. If I had to take a guess, these are not the spirits of dead humans, but they are the demons that were around those people in that family long enough to know enough about them that they can sort of pretend to be them and have enough information that they can give you, much like they might whisper into the ears of a psychic every now and then, and so that you're impressed. Well, nobody could have possibly known that, right?
Yeah, interesting. So Rob, you just wrote a book on, so both of you guys, if people are just joining right now, I've got a couple people here. I've got Ken and Rob, and they're both have written some stuff on the unseen spiritual realm and looking at maybe angels, demons, Nephilim, all this kind of stuff. And so Rob, you were listening to some of our conversation a little while ago. I'm wondering, what were you thinking about some of the things that we were talking about? Because I know that you're also a Heiser fan, as I have become. So
yeah, I literally put it on like in the last 10 minutes, and I started listening when you start talking about, as far as I understand, you're saying, say if someone like Goliath is not a Nephilim or not a descendant from Nephilim. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, yes,
Right.
I am saying he's not.
Yeah. And so then, therefore, how far would you go with the demons? Would you say that the Shadim, the introduction of demons, that they are not the disembodied Nephilim?
Well, let me take one step back. So
Okay.
to a point that I discussed with AJ, and I don't know if you heard it, the one and only reason you would even imagine that Goliath had anything to do with Nephilim is because of the single verse in Numbers 13:33, period. Without that, you wouldn't even imagine that. There'd be no reason to.
Okay. Did you catch my 2-hour video, nearly 2-hour video, on Scholar Fiction? Because in that, so there's an 8-minute video I uploaded titled "Responding to Joshua Bowen on the Canaanite Nephilim," and there's a Q&A done where Heiser was asked a question, and it's an old question: why Canaan? And so Heiser's like, look, this is Unseen Realm 2 territory because I don't know, did you come across that video? Did you watch that video? Like, I don't want to repeat it if you're ready.
For some reason, did you put out a shorter version as well? Because I remember, now I remember. It wasn't your video that I watched on that. It was Joshua's, and he put out a much shorter video which included him making some statements, and he put in the clip from Heiser talking about that as well. I don't think I could interact with it specifically without re-listening to it, however.
Yeah, I just watched your video on slavery, by the way, and you did a great job. The one that you just put out yesterday.
Did you like how I ended it?
Yeah. You ended it with what was that song?
Amazing Grace song.
Yeah, Amazing Grace. That was great.
Just to visually show the significance of why that hymn even exists, and the suggestion that, look, Christianity has no say in the slavery topic, that just debunks the whole thing. So yeah.
No, that was a very good video. Yeah. Good people that you included in there too. So just to go off on a tangent, but back to the one with Joshua and Skylar and and Nephilim. I have to say, I love the interactions between you three because it's hilarious. You guys make these videos, and actually this morning I just caught some video that I don't know how many years ago you guys did that, but Skylar was
that was actually, that aged very well. I mean, again, we don't want to derail this conversation, but I recommend you watch that, especially the original, because that was 3 years ago. That was October 2017. Okay. I guess you could say that was from 2015 to 2017. Those 2 years was me eating up a lot of Heiser and Ancient Near Eastern material. So don't forget, I was 5 years into my Christian walk by then, when talking to Skylar. And just re-listening to that was 3 years ago. Just re-listening to it, I was quite impressed with myself. So, but yeah, there was a lot of things.
Well, at least somebody was.
Skylar was.
So funny.
It actually ends with Skylar saying, "Look, I really appreciate you." He's talking to me, but it's just weird. It's like now there's a bit of tension, and I don't know why. Like I'm not the one causing the tension, but yeah.
Well, I had a little bit of a discussion with Skylar, and the moment he told me he's a moral relativist, I pointed out to him that you have just discredited yourself from ever condemning anything, and he apparently didn't like that. So I replied again.
But coming back on the current topic, you see, it makes a lot of sense for me. So there's the yod in Numbers 13, the extra yod. The Nephilim occurs twice in Numbers 13. So they were like the Nephilim from the Nephilim. The from the Nephilim is that one with the extra yod, which is, according to Heiser, when you morphologically look at the shape of, like what you call the shape of the word in Hebrew, it connects back to Genesis 6. Yeah. So then he goes, okay, let's rabbit trail this out, where you have the Aramaic version for giant, in order to give that. So it's not from Nephal, fallen. How do we know the word means giant? It's because of the Aramaic equivalent, which in this case, if you're talking about the redactional process of the Torah, say in the exilic context, so like Babylonian context, so then you have a Babylonian tradition going back to this Apkallu myth. So then Enoch is connected with that, and like you have this, immediately you start having this like web of connections. And it's not just number 13. It even goes all the way into Ezekiel, which is like Ezekiel 32 with the Gobarim. Gibborim. Gibborim is the underworld, like giant like entities that are connected to the Nephilim. So the Rephaim would be another connection to that. Like,
okay,
have you made those connections, or?
See, that's one of my problems. Is I will still affirm that it is on the one single verse in Numbers 13:33 that then we're going to look at the morphology of the spelling of words. We're going to look at root words, and we're going to piece all these things together to form a grand narrative that is not existent in the Bible. So, for example, Gibborim means mighty, period, point blank. It is not a people group. It does not refer to denizens of the underworld exclusively. So that alone shows you that this is all being, I'm going to use the term manipulated, not as to put down somebody's motives, but just in the literal sense of grabbing things and putting them together. Something not there.
So sorry, what did you say that the Gibborim was?
Gibborim. It's just a descriptive term. It means mighty. That's when we apply it to anything else, we need to remember that it just means might or mighty. Gibborim,
so then where does a tradition, what's called the Traveler's Valley, so Gog and Magog's, so the valley of Gog and Magog, that's and then it has like this mythical thing called the Traveler's Valley, the Oberim, where like the whole Moses body situation, like there's a question, why was Michael and Satan fighting over the body of Moses in Jude? And there's that whole Second Temple thing about, kind of like to use Lord of the Rings reference here, or like an analogy, where you have Frodo at the end of Lord of the Rings get onto a boat and then sail off into heaven, so to speak. It's that metaphor that you see later in Ezekiel, where it's called like a cosmic ship that lurks through the underworld river. And then that's connected with, if you're going to Greco-Roman myths, so like the river Styx, connect where you have Tartarus on one end and the Elysium fields on the other, and then there's that river that joins between the two. And I don't know. I'm actually in the midst of coming out with a video with all these connections. Yeah.
Hey, out of nothing but love, let me just say, I'm glad you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I like this kind of stuff because
let
I
me
feel
just
like there's a lot of underlying currents in the Bible that we don't know about. And I think that's what makes this so fascinating. It's like an onion that you keep peeling at the surface. It looks very simple and anyone can understand it, supposedly. And then as you dig deeper, it's like, wait a second, you've got more layers and layers and layers and layers, and it's really fascinating.
Because what you see, the whole Canaan question, like, why Canaan? It's a brilliant question because the question asks Heiser, well, why not Egypt? Or why not this? Or why not that? And so Heiser goes, well, then you have this watcher problem, right? You know, the sons of God and the Nephilim. Like, you have that then funneled into this kind of like Hitler with Berlin. So you have the surrounding nations pointing towards that spot as the hot spot for evil, so to speak, ground zero for hell. Like Bashan, you know, this is ground zero, like in Matthew 16. So then the interesting thing is, Heiser says, when Jesus does certain things in the Gospels, he's reversing certain Old Testament things going on, and ironically connected to the Watcher Nephilim problem. Even down to the genealogy, like the 4 women in Matthew's genealogy is connected to the Watchers somehow. And then you have to trace that, somehow. And then you have to trace that to through the Second Temple literature, like Enoch. Even those 4 women mentioned in the genealogy.
the somehow is my problem. Is that the
Right.
somehow is built on a hermeneutic that makes it so that we're not going to pull together everything we possibly can into this narrative, where you can still have Canaan being the focus of these issues without inserting the concept of Nephilim in there, because what you have in there is various subgroups of Rephaim, and they are in charge of the land that needs to be conquered.
So then
I want to go back. Let me go back. Let's go back to Canaan, actually, what you're saying right here, because I'm finding this fascinating. And I feel like Heiser might have said something about this in the unseen realm that I've forgotten about. But I want to go back to Canaan as this idea of sort of ground central for hell, because I think about the bulls of Bashan in Psalm 22. And obviously the references to those bulls of Bashan was a reference to the Pharisees in some way, to me. At least that's how I always thought of the bulls of Bashan, as being the Pharisees who were taunting Jesus when he was up there on the cross and all around during the crucifixion. And so,
yeah, the bulls of Bashan is a good connection there as well.
Yeah. So how do we get to the point where Canaan could be? Because I think about also Baal and the sacrifices at Canaan and the kind of egregious things they were doing there. How would we get to that being ground zero for hell in a sort of a way? Maybe the earthly manifestation of what could be the worst place you could possibly be on the earth. At least that's maybe what I'm seeing that you're saying. I'm not sure if that's what you guys are saying.
Wait, is this a question for me?
Yeah. So because I think you just said that Canaan's sort of the center of the evil activity, and so they had to go conquer Canaan and take it over.
So I'm trying to be succinct with this. So the somehow. So I think it comes back to Ken's question on the word somehow, and it's a legitimate question. So it is. He does have a point to at first be kind of skeptical, I guess, because of the word somehow. But when I say somehow, and when Heiser says somehow, it's not an educated guess. So it's not guesswork. It's more like it's sort of like a detective type work where you're going, okay, you have like blips on a radar screen. It's like, whoop, bang, suddenly Goliath, just out of nowhere. Like, you're fast forwarding, say, through Judges, and then you have glimpses of certain, Rephaim type groups popping here and there and so on. Then, like, say, Joshua, then Judges, and then you lead into Samuel, and then into Philistine territory, and then boom, suddenly Goliath out of nowhere, and then his brothers, and then that's it. And then fast forward into Second Temple literature, then they start to then conjecture on not only the Nephilim giant problem, but they start to conjecture on the demonology and where do these demon spirits come from. And then when you reach the New Testament narrative, you have not only Peter and Jude connect a particular type of God, like God's judgment in a particular way to the fallen angels and what they did. But then you have them using the same Second Temple literature, like First Peter 3, Jesus going down into Tartarus and those particular spirits he's talking to say that you've lost. And then you have Jesus talking to the very demons, saying we have legion, and asking them for their name, and then going to this particular regions again where the Nephilim were located, like in Mark 5 with the demon man. And like the very fact that it even goes and describes him as able to break chains, and like that's all imagery to show, again, in Second Temple literature, to show their connection to the giant watcher type strength and all that stuff. So Heiser's question is, the question to Heiser was, well, why Canaan? Why does Yahweh have like an obsessive compulsive disorder, so to speak, in only this particular real estate on planet Earth? And that's a good question. So then Heiser says, well, based on Jewish myth and theology, so specifically the Bible, this region seems to be the HQ of these particular beings. Like they like, especially after the flood, they seem to choose this location as HQ. Then the drive to take them over, and now it becomes this battle of cosmic geography. So like Psalm 68 actually is a great psalm. The mountain of God versus the mountain of Bashan. So why do you, mountain of Bashan, look at envy to the mountain of God, which is in this case Sinai? And so the imagery is mountain of righteousness, so Yahweh, and mountain of sin, which is the watcher, and then Satan ultimately. And Psalm 68. So Psalm 68 says Yahweh goes up the mountain to save captives, and he then receives gifts from the captives. Psalm 68 is used by Paul in Ephesians 4. Jesus goes up the mountain, saves the captives, but then he changes the word receive to give. He gives gifts. And when do we see gifts being given? Well, Pentecost. In order to then do what? Not only reclaim the nations, but to drive out the demons and the spirits, which is what Paul says later in Acts, because he's apostle to the Gentiles. And so my question to you, Ken, would be, are the Second Temple Jews wrong in making the connection between Nephilim and the spirits? Is there a hierarchy to, say, watcher, then fallen angel, then say spirits, or are they all the same, one and the same thing in your perspective?
You're going to have to listen to the first part of the discussion that we had. I don't want to rehearse all of it.
Okay.
But I would say that, you said that this is about Jewish myth and theology, specifically from the Bible, where I would say we're getting into territory of Jewish myth and theology, specifically not from the Bible, but from Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha, mostly Second Temple era, where who knows whether this is to be categorized as folklore or historical fiction, or why this is being done with the little bit. So, for example, I would say the only reliable information we have biblically on the Nephilim is one single verse in Genesis 6:4. So why is this being done? Sometimes we know that people would look at those things about which the Bible said very little, and then take it upon themselves to expand on it. So whether they were doing that as a fraud or as historical fiction, we don't really know. But there's a reason why when we get into this territory, all of a sudden we have to, by necessity, start appealing to Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha, because that's where all this comes from, not the Bible. Not directly, anyway. So for example,
sorry, go ahead.
We both said for example at the same time. So back to the issue of Goliath. Why should anyone of us even imagine that Goliath has anything to do with Nephilim?
Because Joshua 11, so here's the connection, and this goes into now what critical scholars would like to appeal to, and that is redaction or criticism, where they're like, oh, see, Joshua is finally compiled in the exilic period, blah, blah. Because you have Joshua 11 very specifically saying the last of the giants go into Philistine territory like Gath and so on, and then guess
Hold-
what? Boom, you see Goliath coming
Okay,
up with that. Yeah.
Let me just urge us to forget the generic, subjective, and undefined term English giants. Let's make sure we're talking about Rephaim.
Mm-hmm.
When you said the word giants, you were saying Rephaim at that point. So
Yeah,
of
they're all,
course,
yeah.
so of course, Goliath is correlated to Rephaim because he was a Repha. By definition, he was a Philistine who were a subgroup of Anakim who were a subgroup of Rephaim. So just remember that, and let's think about it. When you refer to him as a giant, you're referring to him as a Repha, and yeah, of course, that's what he was. Period. Why think that he had anything to do with Nephilim, though? That's the question.
Because the word Nephilim means giant. That's all it means.
Okay, let's pause there a second. Now, when you tell me the word Nephilim means giant, you haven't told me anything, because now I have to ask you what giant means.
So like in Genesis 6:4, the men of renown, the men of the name, the fact that Anakim in Numbers 13 are also connected to the Nephilim, and so then when you trace that word Anakim, so okay, if you just remove the word Nephilim, because that's a transliteration, if you just say giant or giants because it's in the plural, so divine beings, so literally in Genesis 6 it says divine beings came down and caused this unclean mixing of divine and terrestrial to make so divine beings and human women produce this unclean mixing, which is the giants. So then Numbers 13, it's like literally, in fact, if I open it right now, I can read it this way.
Okay, but I'm not sure why we're gonna forego the specific Hebrew term in the verse and appeal to a vague, subjective, undefined English term.
But it's not vague when
Well, of course it is.
especially when highs of.
I can think of at least 4 different definitions of the word giant, so I don't know what you're talking about at this point.
So it says here, all the people whom we observe are giants.
Where?
In verse 30, Numbers 13:32, and then 33, because in the Hebrew at the end of 32, it's literally observed are men of measurements. But the word Nephilim occurs in 33. So we also saw the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak. Compared to the Nephilim, we see things we're like grasshoppers. So, but if you translate Nephilim as giant, so we also saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, and compared to the giants, as we see things, we are like grasshoppers. So then now, if the fact that it's transliterated in our English translations is to emphasize to us, because if we just read giants, we'd be just like, oh, all right. Could it be connected to Genesis 6? Maybe. But that's the interesting point, is that if you're a Hebrew reader and you're seeing, oh, look, there's an extra yod there. Linguistically, that's going back to Genesis 6 Nephilim. And it's saying they're the descendants of Anak. So then you have to now do a whole word study on the history of Anak and the Anakim. And the fact that, even the word Anak is connected to do with their neck, their head structure, and it seemed to be a bit abnormal. And so my point is, fast forward to the New Testament.
Well, hold on. Because this is part of the problem, is throwing a bunch of bits and pieces together and then saying ergo. So if you don't mind, let's just pause for a second.
Okay.
I don't want to prevent you from going there. I want to just slow down a second. So as an example, let me read you the Septuagint for Numbers 13:33. There we saw the Nephilim, and we were even so were we before them. So in the Septuagint, there's no mention of Anakim, period. All right, let's look at Deuteronomy 1:28, and this is Caleb speaking. And ye murmured in your tents and said, because the Lord hated us, he has brought us forth out of Egypt to deliver us to the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Whither shall we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people is great and taller than we. The cities are also great and walled up to heaven, and moreover, we have seen the sons of Anakim there. So Caleb's recollection of the event has no reference to Nephilim whatsoever.
This is in the Septuagint.
No, I'm sorry. Forgive me for that. I read Numbers 33 in the Septuagint. I read Numbers 13:33 in the Septuagint, and then I jumped to the Masoretic, the KJV for Deuteronomy 1:28. But now, just backing up to Genesis 6 for a minute.
Deuteronomy where? Where in Deuteronomy?
1:28, 1:27 and 28.
Okay. 1:27. You mean the Lord? Wait, you murmured in your tents, the Lord hates us. He brought us out of the land of Egypt. And then 28. Our brothers discouraged us when they said the people are bigger, taller than we are. The cities are tall. And we also saw the Anakim there.
So it's interesting. Caleb is almost reacting.
Say that one more time, Ken, because I think you just cut out for a second.
Yeah, I was just referring to how Caleb is his recollection of that event has no reference to Nephilim, and of course it would, because the term Nephilim only appears twice in the whole Bible. So his recollection is that the issue was Anakim, and the claim that was made by the other 10 spies. Keep in mind, we are still having this discussion as if what the evil report said was accurate. That's a fundamental level error. So now, if we go...
Ken, I will be honest, I'm still confused with what you're trying to say. So who are the Anakim? Who are the Nephilim in number 13? Where did they come from?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked, because there's a fundamental difference. The Bible referring to the Nephilim as being actually existing on the ground in real life is when they're referred to as a concept, as a word, as a term. So in Genesis 6:4, obviously that's recording when they were literally alive, walking around on planet Earth. Number 13:33 is a claim made by 10 of the spies.
So you're saying that they were making an excuse to not go up, and so they make this false report, and so that's how you understand false report.
Right. So the narrative all the way until verse 30, let me look it up here. All the way up until verse 31, everything they said is taken as is. It's like there's no question about it. You're speaking well of. We already went through this earlier in the discussion. They speak well of the land. They show the fruit of the land. They describe the various people groups living in the land. And they talk about how the people are strong. Then it is within the evil report that for which they were rebuked, where they contradict themselves. They all of a sudden speak ill of the land. They all of a sudden claim not that the people are strong, but all of a sudden they're also of great stature. They had already listed all the people they saw in the land. All of a sudden they insert that, oh, guess what? We also saw the Nephilim. You see that's all brand new information, and it's self-contradictory. And we're told it's evil, and they were rebuked for it. And they contradict Moses, Caleb, Joshua, God, and the whole entire rest of the Bible. So that's a fundamental issue. Why would anybody believe these guys?
So what happened to the Nephilim in Genesis 6?
Well, they lived pre-flood. 8 people survived the flood. So, End of story.
So you'd say the flood is global, and only 8 people survived.
I would say that you can actually turn this into, and I don't want to get into a question about the flood because that's not within our context, but one of the evidences that the globe was, okay, let me give you 2 scenarios. You can either say the flood was global because of the fact that Nephilim lived pre-flood and all of a sudden they disappear forever, or you could say that is because they were living in the region that was flooded. And in either way, the last of them died in the flood, and that's the end of the story. Because
Let's get it. Let's switch
yeah,
gears a little bit. Let's switch
wait,
gears a little
Steph,
bit.
this
Yeah.
no, Steph, this okay, last point. Because this is the crux. And Ken knows this is the crux. So
Okay, perfect.
hypothetical question, Ken. If the flood is local, and if the Nephilim of Genesis 6 survive, because you do have in Genesis 6:4 when it says in parentheses, when that even after this, right, that this Nephilim was still around. So if the flood's local and Nephilim do survive the flood, because you've heard me interview Jeff Rose with the whole Persian Gulf thing and all that. So if that's true, then are the numbers 13 Nephilim actually the so-called false report? They are actually describing actual descendants of that pre-flood Nephilim.
If we take the Masoretic's word for it, then unfaithful, disloyal, rebuked spies who contradict Moses, Caleb, Joshua, God, and the whole rest of the Bible are making that claim, yes.
There you go. So that's the crux.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That is the crux. And there's, let me ask you.
If the flood's local and if there's that connection, if they do survive, yeah.
If in your daily life, would you believe people who are self-contradictory, who are said to present an evil report, who are rebuked for it, who contradict Moses, Caleb, Joshua, God, and the whole rest of the entire Bible? Would you ever imagine doing something like that when the narrative is so crystal clear that what these guys were saying was false?
That's the thing. I don't think it's a false report the way you're reading the text there, because ironically, even Heiser has a footnote on that saying that it was all about their lack of faith.
Well, no, see, we already discussed that earlier in the show. Their lack of faith comes up before we are told they brought an evil report. That happens before. The content of the evil report is what they claimed in buttressing their don't go in the woods type of tall tale. But let me ask you something. You talked about a parentheses in Genesis 6:4.
Mm-hmm.
As if there's parentheses in the Hebrew, by the way, but I'm just picking on you for that.
No, yeah.
What makes you think, and this is, we already discussed this also, but what makes you think that has anything to do with the flood?
Does that have anything to do with the flood?
Yeah, Genesis 6.
Because you have that ancient myth in Mesopotamian law, the Apkallu. So you have what's known as full Apkallu, and then post Apkallu are called 2/3 Apkallu, 1/3 human. So you have that mix, that hybrid mix, after Utnapishtim's flood and all that, those ancient areas, and that literally mimics the Genesis narrative. What I wanted to ask you ultimately is this New Testament depiction of what's called unclean spirits, because the very fact that they call unclean spirits, again, is utilizing Second Temple literature because of that unclean mixture, again, going back to the Nephilim being unclean, like unclean.
So the argument I made earlier is that the unclean spirits are the spirits of incarcerated angels. So what would make them unclean is that they are sinful, having left their first estate. They are the fallen. They are the unclean. They are the sinful angels, but they're the spirits of the angels that are physically incarcerated.
But the word unclean is always used for these particular demon spirits. It's never used for, say, the fallen watchers, or even Satan is not called unclean. Even in the Qumran text, it's always this type of entity. Like when Jesus says, these particular entities roam around looking for people to embody, and the very fact that he's going out of his way to say that is again connected to, say, the Enochian literature and the war scroll texts in Qumran that speak about the desert spirits or the goat demons that you see in Isaiah sometimes. And they're known as unclean because of that. They derive from that. They're disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, because the Nephilim are unclean entities due to that mixture, that bestiality mixture between divine and human.
Let me, I want to add to that, because I just have a thought on that whole thing that you just reminded me of something from the only time in the Bible where we see a human come back out of the outer world is the time when Samuel comes back, when he's summoned by Saul. Saul, was it? Yeah. And so he comes back and talks. And so what I'm wondering, I want you guys to think about this, is it possible, if people are summoned who have passed, to come back and to interact in this world from what your worldview is? I look at the Samuel situation and think that it would be possible based on what the Bible says, but I'm wondering what you guys think on that. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I'm wondering about humans being unclean as well. A human dying and being unclean and being down there.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's no. There's no, that's my point. There's no connection with that phrase, the word unclean being used of, ironically, any type of quote unquote Elohim. Because as Heiser will say, you have a category of Elohim. Yahweh is obviously top. Mm-hmm. Samuel's at the bottom. But a particular type of Elohim, the Shadim, the demons, which are, so Deuteronomy 32:17 literally says, post-flood, and especially the emergence of, say, Abraham, that then this thing known as Israel emerges, and then the Exodus takes place. Literally, 32:17 says, then Israel started to worship new gods. The fact that it's saying new there, gods that did not exist before, so the word Elohim is being used, and these are the Shadim, the demons. So then that's why Jews were asking this question, well, where do they come from, right? And then the whole thing on, okay, are they the disembodied Nephilim that are lurking around? And that's why they call them unclean.
That would fit my theory too, because it is only when the angels are incarcerated that demons come into existence. But SJ, the Bible's not extremely specific, but as far as we can tell, absent from the bodies present with the Lord, so that the issue with Samuel, if issue with Samuel would have been a unique one, where God allowed something to happen that generally did not happen. And in fact, that might be part of the reason why when Samuel appears, the medium of Endor freaks out, right? She yells out. Part of it might be because then she realized it's Samuel, and then she realized that it was Saul. So she's freaked out because he had made that stuff illegal. But maybe it's because she had never actually experienced something like this before, or this specific, where the actual person comes back.
That's true. That's possible, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I'm just trying to fit it all together, because you do wonder, how does this hierarchy work? We talk about Ephesians 6 and there's a hierarchy, and exactly who's on the top of the hierarchy, who's at the next level. I mean, we're not given these details, but right. I'd like to know exactly how all of these different spiritual beings or Elohim, how they all fit into this hierarchy. And so how high are they and how low are the demons? Michael Heiser said the demons are pretty much the lowest, and they're the ones that might be the ones bothering people. So.
Yeah, I'd consider that a granted. Yeah,
I mean, you have the same like the locus in Revelation 9. Like, in fact, I've spent like 20 or 30 pages. I've just written a Revelation commentary where I had to go out of my way to the group that I was. So I wrote the studies that has now turned into this commentary, where I had to introduce to the group, well, okay, look, the whole Abaddon, Apollyon and Abaddon, like the angel of the bottomless pit, opening the pit, and these locusts coming out, and the whole, I had to give a whole, like, Genesis 3 onwards sort of, like, overview to explain what John's getting at here. And even in my research, digging out the details, I find it interesting that when the locusts are described with this hybrid imagery, again, it goes right in line with the, for example, something as simple as mixing the fabrics, that's considered unclean. That again, that language of mixing is in the imagery of the locusts, which again is connected with the demons, that is so-called unclean spirits. And the unclean spirits are acknowledging Jesus as the Son of the Most High, which no human being in the Gospels call him that, because it's the Most High that not only did the flood, right, that judged the Watchers and the Nephilim, but it's the Most High that was killing off the Nephilim throughout Joshua's wars and onwards.
Well, that's another assumption.
I think I want to add to this idea of the locust, because it just reminded me of something that I think is super fascinating. If you go back to Exodus and you look at the time when God sent the 10 plagues, and each plague actually represented one of the gods the Egyptians were worshiping at the time. And so the locust was one of them, where they sent a bunch of locusts, and there was apparently a god that kind of had some representation of a locust. There was a god that had representations of other aspects of those 10 plagues that he sent. And so I kind of think it's interesting going to Revelation. I haven't looked at this, but this idea of the locust coming out, maybe representing some sort of lower level Elohim gods that went awry.
Well, Rob, one thing, okay, I don't know when you started listening, but it's funny you mentioned you wrote 30, 40 pages on that, because I wrote about 30 just trying to explain my theory of what demons are. And one thing I ended up talking about, and I mentioned it earlier.
Oh, you published a book?
Oh, I published numerous books.
I need to check this out. It's cool.
Yeah, I've got to put links to his books in here. I'll put links to both of your things in here, by the way. I gotta get that going.
Yeah, my commentary is 300 something pages now, 380. So
SJ,
I gotta read that.
I emailed you the link to my book page, by the way, so you can.
Perfect.
Anyhow,
Okay.
so Rob, I was saying that, and again, it's difficult to be so succinct, but what I was arguing is the bodies of angels were incarcerated and their spirits were left to roam the earth as demons. So Revelation 1 is symbolically describing the opening up of where the angels are incarcerated. That's when their spirits, the demons, re-inhabit their bodies and they come out. And all that imagery all the symbolism can be traced to other portions of the Bible, which I did in my book, such as that having hair like women means they're under authority. Locust being that they're a horde, right? A destructive, consuming horde. Faces like men, represent the intellect. And all of that can be traced throughout the Bible to end up that it's a symbolic description of what is coming forth. It's describing the characteristics of the beings that are coming out of there, in my view.
How does that fit your view, Rob?
And by the way, Apollyon, aka Abaddon, is one of the 3 and possibly 4 names of angels in the Bible. I know, SJ, you mentioned 2 already.
Yeah, we have Michael, Gabriel, and I think Raphael is mentioned in.
No, that's not biblical.
Yeah, that's extra biblical, Raphael. But Michael and Gabriel, I think, are the only 2 that I know of. But you say Apollyon?
Right, because Revelation 9 tells you right there that the angel of the bottomless pit is Apollyon, aka Abaddon.
Yeah, and interestingly, so this is where I disagree with Heiser, because Heiser will say the angel of Revelation 10, and so you have in Revelation 1 Jesus saying, I have the keys to death and Hades. Then you have, if you fast forward to Revelation 10, you have this powerful angel standing on land and sea and saying similar things. And then you fast forward at the end of Revelation, again, this death, Hades, keys language happens. So then a lot of scholars are like, look, so G.K. Beale and Heiser, they'll say, look, Revelation 9 is actually that same angel. It's a good guy, basically. It could be Jesus, sort of going down and unlocking the gates of hell. I think I would agree with Ken. It's actually it could actually be Satan himself, or it could be some very high
Oh no,
ranking.
no, no! I'm not saying that at all.
Okay, what are you saying?
There are a few problems. First of all, that's not hell. That's the abyss, and also Satan's not an angel, so this definitely could not be him. So it states that angel blew a trumpet, and I saw a star fall from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit, which is abyss. And then
Wait. Are you talking about abyss as in? So wait, when you say it's not hell, are you saying ultimate hell being the lake of fire at the end of Revelation? That
you know what
all
is
of this
funny?
is thrown into.
What's funny is we were supposed to discuss heaven and hell today, but we cannot go down that rabbit trail at this
Okay.
point because it would just deviate way too much. So yeah, hell to me is just one of those terms like giant, right? It's undefined, and it's unfortunate that
Yeah.
it's used to render so many Hebrew and Greek terms that it makes a real mess. So I was only picking on that because of that. So the Revelation 9 is talking about the abyss, not the eternal destiny of anybody, right?
So
Like
The
Hades.
I
bottomless,
think, yeah,
no, the bottomless pit, the abyss.
but you'd say that angel in Revelation 9 is not a good angel, is what you're saying.
You know what? The only thing we're told is that whoever comes out of the pit has a king over them. The angel, excuse me, they have a king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit. That's about all we're told. We're not even told
And
it's the
that's what
same
I'm
one
saying
that,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, we're not even told it's the same one that opened the abyss. So they have a king over them, angel of the bottomless pit. And so it might be that he's the leader of those fallen angels. I mean, I don't know.
Sure. And
He's
that's
the king
so
over
so
them.
that's why Heiser will say the one who's opening that pit doesn't have to be the bad one, because at the end of the day,
Right.
he has to have the power to open it, which obviously only God has the power to do that.
Yeah. So Revelation 9 begins with the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star
Yeah.
fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened it. And
Yeah.
of course, star, in certain contexts, star is symbolic of angel. Just like I was going to point out this really quickly, another possible name of an angel in Revelation 8:10, which you were just alluding to, the third angel sounded, and there was a great star, fell a great star from heaven, burning up as a lamp. And then it says the name of the star is Wormwood. That could be the name of another angel, a fourth one that we have in the Bible.
I think it's funny that C.S. Lewis chose the name Wormwood in his screw tape letters.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys, I'm thinking we probably have maybe 5-10 minutes left before we should probably wrap it up. So I gotta make some dinner. So that's. But I love the fact that both of you are so well studied on this stuff. So I'm just taking it all in.
Well, Rob, I would definitely love to discuss with you further at some other point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
SJ, it's been a pleasure. It's been really, really fascinating discussion.
No, this has been great. And so I'm definitely going to link your books. And Rob, do you have a link to any of your, I mean, I can link I'll link Sentinel Apologetics. I think I might even have that permanently linked in my YouTube description. But
kidding?
if I don't,
he has a link right above his head right now.
No, that's not my link. No.
Oh, is it?
No, that's a watermark
that's
of
the
software of this thing I'm doing.
Okay.
Yeah. Now this is literally impromptu. While I'm testing this out, I'm listening to this, and then I'm going, hang on a second, I want to chime in here.
This is what we do. We catch you in our chat and we pull you in. And it's like, get in here. Yeah. we got some conversation. I know both of you are writing about this stuff and you're passionate about this stuff. So
just before you end this, a very quick question to Ken: are you hesitant because you obviously you're very reverent towards 66 books, the canon, right? The biblical canon. So you're hesitant to use anything that's outside as a type of.
I wouldn't put it that way.
Enochian literature.
No, for instance, one of my books is the apocryphal Nephilim and Giants, where I only discuss what the non-biblical texts have to say. I would definitely place them way down the line, second, third, down the line. But for instance, Ethiopic Enoch, I think, is wonderful for grammatical, historical, cultural context, but I would not derive my theology from there, especially since it's a text that contradicts the Bible on some points. So can I understand from it what Second Temple Jews were thinking about these things? Absolutely. No question in my mind that it's helpful in that sense. But am I going to, yes, go ahead.
So this would be my last statement. So then all I'll say is I'm going to be releasing a video called The Dark Supernatural History of the Nephilim as sort of like a big borrowing. It'll be like 90% from my Revelation commentary, but it'll be a video study on to sort of put to rest the non-supernatural views of the Joshua's wars, and sort of like what you see from the atheist crowd. So in other words, I'll definitely be showing the perspective of highs, but actually going into more detail, even hypothesizing, say, the genetics, this thing called giantism, and why you have polydactylism, like extra digits on some of the giants. So I'm going to be showing that in that video. And yeah, I'm happy for you to critique it if you watch it.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing is grab number 1333 and run with it. You can't get away from that, because that's where you get a correlation between Nephilim and unusual height. And incidentally, there's only one single person who is referred to as having extra digits, and he's a Repha. So then you have to force him to become a Nephil because of that one verse.
Well, I'll be producing that video soon, so look out for it.
Well,
and I'll be tackling all of those questions. Yeah.
Well, it sounds very interesting with both of you. I think I have people in the chat saying they'd like to see a debate between you guys. So,
well, we could definitely have an iron sharpening discussion.
I think it's always good to do that, because it actually now I'm more interested to do some deep digging, because I want to know all the verses that both of you have mentioned here. I want to go into those and figure out what's going on, and also go back to Enoch and look at these extra. I do like looking at the stuff outside of the Bible, just because Enoch, for example, was referenced in the Qumran, and the Essenes were supposed to be very conservative relative to what they considered the Pharisees to be. And so I think that some of their stuff is legitimate as far as looking at it. I know it might contradict, and so then we have to look at that. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they've been excluded by Jewish people of late, or at least maybe since, I don't know, since
always,
or since the Talmud came out. But I don't know. I could be wrong about that. I don't know exactly when did the book of Enoch and all of these books, when was it decided that they weren't going to be included in the Jewish canon?
Oh, that Enoch thing was actually late in the early church. We're talking 2nd, 3rd century. And so if Christians were using that stuff, you had, in that Revelation commentary, I actually show how early church fathers did an equivalent of a C.S. Lewis, kind of like the Lion Witch Wardrobe sort of fantasy fiction, but in a theological sense. They actually did that with the Nephilim, Tartarus, because, for example, the Lazarus story, the resurrection of Lazarus, not the other one, more of the actual event.
Lazarus, the brother Mary and Martha.
Yeah. So there's, I have a page length commentary by one church father that goes out of his way to say, I wonder what was happening when Jesus shouted out the words, Lazarus, come out. So this is typical of the patristics, where they'll go, oh, okay. There's like kind of like as if time paused, and Jesus went into Tartarus, and then he's having a debate and a dialogue with, in this case, the Watcher Spirits, because he's drawing from 1 Peter 3, that you're going to lose this fight, and that's why I'm able to call Lazarus back. It's just amazing to see how these Christians were thinking. So
yeah, I'd like to dig
into that. If all these threads are not there, that they're not connected to Genesis 6, In fact, let me put it this way. This is the crux of Heiser's argument in Reversing Hermon. Genesis 6:1-4 is the crux for everything you see moving forward in the Bible, especially Jesus in the New Testament. That's a pretty bold claim. But I think what Ken's saying is Genesis 6:1-4 is just that one-time event that was settled with the flood. That's it. And there's no connection. Maybe the Nephilim that died in the flood became the Shadim that roam around afterwards. But that may be the extent of it. There's no actual connection to why Canaan. Why are the Anakim and the Rephaim giants? Why do they then connect to the underground? The Gobarim. I may be mispronouncing that word.
Gibborim.
Gibborim, like in Ezekiel 32. These you see, when I'm not a specialist in the languages, but I make the connections. I see the breadcrumb trail that Heiser's making, and it makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense.
So,
the only problem is that some of his crumbs are a little bit crummy. So, if anything, maybe I could put it this way. If there is this progression from Genesis 6 all the way through into the eschaton, it's not based on the reality of biblical theology. It's based on it's based on popular theology. It's based on what was done with it, starting from the mouths of the evil report rebukes spies on into the Apocrypha, on into pseudepigrapha.
Right, and that's the question I have for you.
Fiction that you just mentioned, and then on, I wouldn't have a problem saying that, but then it's not based on true theology. It's based on myth and legend that people were wrestling with, and so it had to be dealt with in some form or another.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you the question about, are you hesitant to use Second Temple literature? Because they didn't have a problem with the spies making that statement, because they continued that crumb trail, moving forward.
And to me, that's one of the problems. That is the fundamental level problem, is that, yes, indeed, a lot of people did that. They grabbed it and they were off and running, forgetting the narrative, forgetting that it's one of the least reliable verses in the Bible when you look at how many problems there are with the word, with the way that it's laid out for us.
So
anybody should believe those
I know
guys.
you have to go, but Heiser's book, Reversing Hermon, the
that I just ordered.
That book is that bold claim. Genesis 6:1-4 is, we think of Genesis 3 as the so-called Romans, like Romans is basically Paul's perspective of how is Genesis 3 reversed. But Heiser is saying, well, all these other New Testament texts are clearly all about the reversal of Genesis 6:1-4, because Genesis 6:1-4 is sort of like the sequel to Genesis 3. Genesis 3 was like a mini a mini fall, and then Genesis 6:1-4 is a big one, and then Genesis 11, the tower, is an even bigger one.
But that's been my main criticism of Heiser, is in everything I've read by him, he does not interact with the narrative of number 13. He focuses on verse 33 and runs with it. That is a fundamental problem.
Well, so that'll be, I think we should all probably reconvene at some point and talk about this, or I could even be moderating a conversation with you two if you want to do it that way. And so I have found this really fascinating. And so I think that the people who are watching in the chat also found it fascinating. But I wanted to see, can you two let us know how we can find you and what you're working on now? So I know that you're working on some of these books, and I know both of you have written a lot.
Go for it, Ken.
Oh, thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity. SJ, it's been an absolute pleasure. And speaking to you, Rob, as well.
It's cool speaking to a fan. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Current projects. So my website is truefreethinker.com. All one word, True Free Thinker. I'm working on a project with William Ramsey, who has been doing a multi-part video documentary titled Occult Hollywood. So we're about to do one on transhumanism themes in movies. And then what I had in mind as a writing project after that is aliens and UFOs as themes in Hollywood movies, because I do enjoy interacting with pop culture from a Christian worldview analysis. Like I know Rob's done with the Matrix, so that sort of stuff where you're bringing the
Oh,
Christian.
did you see my cyberpunk parable series?
You know what I meant to ask you if you're aware of I see we can't talk anymore because everything we say is a rabbit trail. I wanted to ask you if you were aware of Sophia Stewart, who claims to be the quote unquote mother of the Matrix and is depicted as the Oracle in that movie.
No, I didn't. I haven't.
Okay, we're gonna have to talk about
followed
that.
up on that. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to talk about that.
I only focus on the movie because the
Yes.
story actually comes from Christians and here in Australia and they sold a script to the Wachowskis. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
There's two people who claim they came up with the ideas behind those. They were pretty much railroaded and got no credit. So anyhow, Sophia Stewart's one of them. Anyhow, we're SJ. She's like, can we just finish up already?
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Okay, Rob, go.
Just quickly also, Ken, I just uploaded the Halo video game. I just uploaded a video called The Descent of Master Chief into the Bowels of Halo. It's connected to what we're discussing. So
okay.
Yeah.
I'll have a look, see.
I think it's like 20-something minutes. But
well, give us a 20-minute description of every scene.
Poor SJ.
No. I like that. You know, the nice thing is about both of you is I noticed you both have this similar passion that I have too. Is there's something about the Bible and about learning about Christianity that just is exciting, and you want to dig deep into it. It's so funny how it's like that because when I was a young kid raised in a Catholic school, I was never excited about this stuff.
And you know what? That's part of why. I mean, I've written, I don't know, maybe books just on the issue of Nephilim and giants, because you read one single verse in Genesis 6:4, and all of a sudden you're having to figure out what are angels, what are demons, what are Nephilim, what are giants, what's the timeline. You're into a ton of extremely complicated, very detailed issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to blow it out of the water with that video. So, but
well, I'll be pouring a little bit of water on it.
Oh my gosh!
You know what I always say is when we sharpen iron with iron, someone tends to get cut.
That's true.
But it's all in love, you know.
That's all good. We're all searching for the truth. I mean, the bottom line is whatever it takes for us to find the truth, and so we try to find the evidence that's been provided us and put it together. So,
indeed.
So you guys can find me on the YouTube. SJ, are you saying you're linking the commentary, the PDF, the Google Drive one?
No, I don't want to share that unless you want me to. But
you can if you want.
Okay. Okay, the one to
I'll
Revelation.
put it up public for free, yeah.
Okay, so I'll link that. I'll link Ken's books and I'll link both of your websites.
All a person has to do is request access, so I can tally and know this is who's viewing it or not, and yeah, it's just a safety feature.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I'm definitely I'm doing all this for free actually. So it's just like you're saying, it's a passion. And the next project I'll be working on, in fact, I'm meant to be transferring all that into video audio format. So like the central commentary on Ephesians, Revelation, that's still a work in progress. The group that I've been writing for, they're asking me now to do Mark. I was actually meant to do Daniel. That's why I prepared the bibliography and all that for Daniel. But so I might be doing Daniel sort of like secretly at the side, but Mark will be the main focus moving forward now that we finished Revelation. So
now I like what you've done on Daniel. I have to say, I read all of your stuff on Daniel, and you and I are in exact agreement as far as the dating of Daniel and all these other topics that are we could go way down
Yeah.
a rabbit trail on that because that fires me up. That's something I can
In fact, I have a few more videos to be released on that because I need to touch on Darius the Mede and
yeah,
his
that's another
connection
thing,
to
Dr.
Cyaxares
Josh.
II and all that. Yeah.
That's definitely, and actually, Rob, I think it would be great if you took your revelation and put that on video, maybe in a series of videos or something like that, because then I could listen to it riding on my bike.
That's the central commentary series.
Oh, you already did it?
Well, that's the playlist. So the commentary
Okay.
on Revelation and the commentary on Ephesians. That's like I've only released like 2-3 episodes on that so far.
Okay.
It's because the studies are built as 12 studies. So I finished Ephesians. So all 12 studies add up to 100 pages. All 12 studies of Revelation add up to 387 pages. So I've done, I think, 3 studies, so 3 videos on Revelation. So it's still early stages. So I still have 9 more videos to go to finish the 12 videos of Revelation.
Wow.
So yeah, it's still early days. I've been focusing on the writing. I just need to now record and put it all together. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that,
So
and
yeah,
Ken,
just
you
check.
too.
Yeah. Just stay on the channel and also check out the blog for any updates. And yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere now. So
Yes, yeah. Well, this is good. This has been a very entertaining and educational chat, and so I really appreciate that both of you came on. And Rob, we just caught you impromptu, and Ken, I just got to meet you for the first time, even though I know I've seen you in the chats before, and so it's great to see you again and to hear your perspectives and all that good stuff. So really, I've enjoyed this. So thank you both so much. And I'm going to put the links to all of your stuff in my description after we get off of this, and we'll go from there. So you guys.
Rob, check the link and then you can contact me through the website.
definitely.
And SJ, sometime I would love to discuss atheism with you because you do some great work in that area.
Discuss what?
Atheism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have a few atheists in the chat. So the atheists are here. They're in the house.
It'd be nice to have a discussion on that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I know you're actually, in case people don't know, his Twitter handle is atheism _is_dead. So atheists, watch out. We believe Romans 1. I just said it. Usually gets people a little fired up. So, okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on. And please everybody like, subscribe, and do come again. And Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So here we go. And okay. So I've just